The horizon flickered with lightning as Cordelia Tucker's wagon wheel snapped, sending the vehicle careening into a ravine just as the skies opened. Spring of 1873 was turning out to be the cruelest season she'd ever known, and now here she was, stranded in the New Mexico territory with a broken wagon and the storm of the century bearing down. "Come on, Persis," Cordelia urged her horse, who snorted nervously as thunder rolled across the plains. She'd named him after the Greek hero, hoping some of that bravery would rub off. Now, as she tried to calm him while seeking shelter, she wondered if she should have chosen a hero with better luck. The rain fell in heavy sheets, soaking through her traveling dress within minutes. Her bonnet offered little protection as she struggled to gather what supplies she could salvage from the wagon. 22 years old, and traveling alone across the frontier, her aunt in Santa Fe would surely say this confirmed every warning she'd given when Cordelia left Philadelphia. "Easy, boy," she whispered, her teeth chattering as she tried to lead Persis toward a cluster of rocks that might offer minimal shelter. The wind howled, drowning her words and whipping her chestnut hair free from its pins. That's when she saw him. A lone rider cresting the hill, silhouetted against the lightning-torn sky. For a moment, Cordelia froze, uncertain whether to feel relief or terror. Bandits weren't uncommon in these parts, and a woman alone made for easy prey. The rider approached steadily, and as he drew closer, she could make out his features beneath the wide brim of his hat's strong jaw dusted with stubble, eyes squinting against the rain, shoulders broad beneath a weathered duster. He pulled his horse to a stop several feet from her. "Madam," he called over the storm, "you're a long way from anywhere in weather not fit for man nor beast." "My wagon." She gestured helplessly toward the ravine. "The wheel broke." He assessed the situation quickly, taking in the broken wagon, her soaked form, and the increasingly violent storm. "There's a line shack about 2 miles east of here. Not much, but it's dry." He extended his hand. "Name's Quinn Blackwood." Cordelia hesitated only a moment before practicality won out over propriety. She'd die in this storm without help. "Cordelia Tucker." "Miss Tucker, we need to move fast. This storm's only getting worse." He swung down from his saddle with the easy grace of a man who'd spent his life on horseback. "Can you ride?" "Yes," she answered, though her experience was limited to gentle park paths in Philadelphia, not racing across open country in a downpour. Quinn efficiently tied her salvaged belongings to his saddle before helping her mount Perseus. He took the reins and mounted his own horse, a magnificent black stallion that stood steady despite the weather. "Stay close," he instructed, and then they were moving, cutting across the landscape as rain lashed at them and lightning split the sky. Cordelia held on desperately, her fingers numb with cold as they rode through the worsening storm. Quinn navigated with confidence, occasionally glancing back to ensure she was still following. The man rode as though he and his horse were a single being, anticipating every dip and rise in the terrain despite the limited visibility. After what felt like hours, but was likely only 30 minutes, a small structure emerged from the gloom, a simple one-room cabin with a lean-to for horses. Quinn dismounted quickly and helped her down, his hands strong and sure at her waist. He led both horses to the shelter while Cordelia stumbled toward the cabin door, her legs nearly buckling beneath her. Inside was sparse but dry, a small cast-iron stove, a narrow bed pushed against one wall, a rough-hewn table with a single chair. Quinn followed moments later, carrying her belongings and his saddlebags. "You're shaking something fierce," he observed, immediately moving to the stove. He pulled kindling and matches from a box beside it, and within minutes had a fire starting. "Thank you," Cordelia managed through chattering teeth. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come along." Quinn shrugged off his duster, revealing the simple attire of a working cowboy, worn denim, leather vest over a cotton shirt, a holstered Colt at his hip. "Nobody should be out in this." Lucky I was heading back from the South Range. He pulled a wool blanket from a trunk and handed it to her. You need to get out of those wet clothes before you catch your death. Cordelia clutched the blanket, suddenly aware of her predicament alone in a remote cabin with a stranger, however well-intentioned. Her hesitation must have shown on her face. I'll see to the horses, Quinn said, reading her concern. Take what time you need. Once alone, Cordelia worked quickly, peeling off her sodden dress and petticoats with trembling fingers. She dried herself as best she could and wrapped the blanket tightly around her frame, leaving her undergarments on despite their dampness. She spread her clothes near the stove, hoping they would dry by morning. When Quinn returned, he politely kept his eyes averted. Horses are settled. Storm's still building, though. We'll be here till morning at least. I appreciate your help, Mr. Blackwood. I know this isn't Brupe. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Propriety takes a back seat to survival out here, Miss Tucker. He busied himself pulling food from his saddlebags, jerky, hardtack, and a canteen of coffee. Not much of a feast, but it's hot. As the cabin warmed and they shared the simple meal, Cordelia studied her rescuer. Quinn Blackwood was not what she'd expected to find in the territories. He spoke with the slight drawl of someone who'd spent time in Texas, but his vocabulary and manners suggested education. What brings you out this way alone? He asked, refilling her tin cup with coffee. I'm traveling to Santa Fe. My aunt lives there, my only remaining family. That's a hard journey for a woman alone. I had little choice. After my father passed, there was nothing left for me in Philadelphia. She didn't mention the mounting debts, the house sold to pay creditors, the pitying looks from former friends. Quinn nodded, understanding in his eyes. The West can be unforgiving, but it offers second chances to those willing to work for them. Is that what brought you here? A second chance. Something flickered across his face, pain, perhaps, or memory. Something like that. The storm raged outside, rain pelting the roof like bullets, but inside the small cabin, a tentative peace had formed. Cordelia found herself relaxing despite the impropriety of her situation. You should take the bed, Quinn said as the evening wore on. I'll make do here by the stove. I couldn't possibly, please, he interrupted gently. My mother raised me better than to let a lady sleep on the floor. Too exhausted to argue further, Cordelia accepted, curling beneath the rough blankets of the narrow bed while Quinn settled himself on his bedroll near the stove. The last thing she remembered before drifting off was the steady sound of his breathing mingling with the storm's fury outside. She woke sometime in the night, disoriented and frightened by a particularly violent crack of thunder. In the dim light from the banked stove, she could make out Quinn's form, sitting upright now, his gun drawn. Just the storm, he said softly, returning the weapon to its holster when he saw she was awake. Go back to sleep, Miss Tucker. You're safe. Strangely, she believed him, and sleep reclaimed her quickly. Morning arrived with tentative sunlight filtering through the cabin's single window. The storm had passed, leaving behind a washed clean world and puddles that reflected the blue sky. Cordelia woke to find Quinn already outside, tending to the horses. Her clothes had dried overnight, and she dressed quickly, attempting to restore some order to her appearance. When Quinn returned, she was pinning up her hair as best she could without a mirror. Morning, he greeted, setting a pail of fresh water on the table. Thought you might want to wash up. Creeks running high from the rain. Thank you. The simple kindness nearly brought tears to her eyes. It had been so long since someone had shown consideration for her comfort. They shared a breakfast of jerky and the last of the coffee before Quinn announced they should assess her wagon situation. It's likely beyond repair, he said as they rode back toward the ravine. But we might salvage more of your belongings. The morning light revealed the full extent of the damage. The wagon had been further battered by the storm, with one side now completely collapsed. Where were you heading in Santa Fe specifically? Quinn asked as they gathered what could be saved. My aunt runs a millinery shop on the plaza. She's offered me a position and a place to stay. Quinn nodded, helping her secure a trunk that had somehow remained intact. Santa Fe's about 3 days' ride from here, following the old trading route. Cordelia's heart sank. I can't impose on you for 3 more days, Mr. Blackwood. There's a ranch about 15 miles north of Flying W. I work there as foreman. We can head there today, get you properly outfitted, and I can escort you to Santa Fe. I couldn't ask, you're not asking. I'm offering. His eyes, a clear hazel she now noticed in the daylight, met hers directly. I wouldn't feel right leaving you to fend for yourself after what you've been through. The practicality of his suggestion was undeniable. Still, Cordelia felt a strange reluctance that had nothing to do with propriety and everything to do with the warmth that spread through her chest whenever Quinn looked at her. Very well, she agreed. But I insist on compensating you for your trouble when we reach Santa Fe. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. We'll discuss that when the time comes. They rode north, Quinn leading the way across terrain that would have been impassable to her alone. He seemed to know every ridge and gully, occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing brief stories about the land. Creek there's called Whisper Creek, he said, gesturing to a narrow waterway they crossed. Story goes a Spanish explorer heard voices in the water but couldn't find their source. Turned out to be nothing but the wind through the cottonwoods, but the name stuck. Cordelia found herself fascinated by these glimpses into the territory's history and by the man sharing them. Quinn Blackwood was a paradox, a hardened cowboy with the manners of a gentleman and the soul of a poet. By midday, they crested a rise that revealed a sprawling ranch in the valley below, buildings clustered around a main house, corrals filled with horses, cattle dotting the distant pastures. The Flying W, Quinn announced. Owned by Walter Whitman, no relation to the poet, though he likes to pretend otherwise when it suits him. As they approached, several ranch hands paused in their work to watch their arrival. Cordelia felt suddenly self-conscious about her disheveled appearance and the circumstances of her arrival. A tall man with a silver-streaked beard emerged from the main house as they dismounted.
Quinn.
Wasn't expecting you back till tomorrow. Who's your friend? Walter, this is Miss Cordelia Tucker. Her wagon broke down in yesterday's storm, and she lost most of her possessions. She's headed to Santa Fe. Walter Whitman's weathered face creased into a smile as he removed his hat. Madam, any friend of Quinn's is welcome at the Flying W. Martha, he called toward the house. We've got a guest needing some looking after. A plump woman with kind eyes appeared on the porch, quickly taking in the situation. Land's sakes, child, you look like you've been through the ringer. Come inside, and let's get you settled. Cordelia found herself whisked away by Martha, who turned out to be the ranch cook and housekeeper. Within an hour, she'd been provided with a hot bath, clean clothes borrowed from Walter's niece who occasionally visited, and a hearty meal that made her realize how hungry she truly was. Quinn said you lost your wagon, Martha commented as she poured Cordelia a cup of tea in the kitchen afterward. Lucky he found you when he did. Not many would brave a storm like that one. I'm very grateful, Cordelia admitted. He's been nothing but kind. Martha's eyes twinkled. That's our Quinn. Showed up here 5 years back, half dead from a bullet wound, and not saying much about where he came from. Walter took a shine to him, and before long, he was running this place better than the old man ever did. Cordelia's curiosity stirred. He was shot. Right across the ribs. Never did say who did it or why, but Walter has his suspicions. The West was a different place during the war, and just after a lot of men carrying grudges and guns to settle them with. Before Cordelia could inquire further, the kitchen door opened and Quinn himself entered, now wearing a clean shirt and with his hair damp from washing. Miss Tucker, he nodded. Feeling better? Much, thank you. Mrs. Whitman has been very kind. Just Martha, dear, the older woman corrected. No relation to Walter except 20 years of cooking his meals and mending his shirts. Quinn smiled at the housekeeper's familiar complaint. Walter says you're welcome to stay as long as needed before continuing to Santa Fe. I told him I'd offered to escort you there. That's very generous of both of you. Nonsense, Martha interjected. Quinn's due for a trip to town anyway. Been working too hard lately. Later that evening, after a dinner with Walter and several of the ranch hands, Cordelia found herself walking beside Quinn in the ranch yard, enjoying the cool night air and the brilliant canopy of stars above. I've never seen so many stars, she commented, her head tilted back. In Philadelphia, the gas lamps and coal smoke obscure most of them. One of the best things about the territory, Quinn agreed. Makes a man feel small, but in a good way. Reminds you there's something bigger than all our troubles. You sound like you've had your share of troubles. He was quiet for a moment. Everyone out here is running from something, Miss Tucker. Or towards something. Sometimes both. Which are you doing? His eyes met hers in the darkness. I thought I was running from. Now, I'm not so sure. The weight of unspoken words hung between them. Cordelia felt an inexplicable pull toward this man she barely knew, a connection that seemed to transcend their brief acquaintance. And you, he asked softly. Running from or toward? Both, I suppose. After Father died, there was nothing left but debts and memories. Aunt Clara's offer seemed like providence. Sometimes the hardest storms bring unexpected blessings, Quinn said, his voice low. The words seemed to carry a meaning beyond their surface. For 3 days, Cordelia remained at the Flying W, preparing for the journey to Santa Fe. Walter insisted on providing her with proper traveling clothes and supplies, waving away her protests. Considerate payment for brightening up our dinner table, the rancher said gruffly. Been too long since we had a ladies' company that wasn't Martha threatening us with her wooden spoon. During those days, Cordelia found herself drawn more and more to Quinn. She watched him work with the horses, his hands gentle but firm, his voice a soothing murmur as he guided even the most skittish animals. She saw how the other men respected him, coming to him with problems both practical and personal. And she noticed how, increasingly, his eyes sought her out across the room, lingering when he thought she wasn't looking. On the evening before their departure, Cordelia joined Quinn on the porch after dinner. The spring air was cool but pleasant, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. Walter says we should have good weather for the journey, she remarked, settling beside him on the bench. Should take 3 days if we're lucky. First night we'll stay at a way station near the old mission. Second at a trading post run by a friend of Walter's. Quinn turned slightly to face her. Are you nervous about reaching Santa Fe? A little, she admitted. I haven't seen my aunt in many years. She was something of a family scandal, married a Spanish trader against my grandfather's wishes and moved west. Yet she's the one you're turning to now. Cordelia smiled ruefully. Ironic, isn't it? The black sheep of the family becomes my salvation. Sometimes those who forge their own path are the ones who truly understand what matters. His hand rested on the bench between them, close but not touching hers. Your aunt sounds like a remarkable woman.
She is.
Her letters were always full of adventures and possibilities, so different from the stifling propriety of Philadelphia society. Cordelia hesitated, then added, I think my father secretly admired her courage, though he'd never admit it. And what about you, Miss Tucker? Do you have that same courage? The question hung in the air between them, laden with meaning that extended far beyond their conversation. I'd like to think so, she answered softly. Quinn's eyes, illuminated by the lantern light spilling from the window, studied her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. I believe you do. They set out at dawn the next morning, with Walter and Martha seeing them off. Cordelia now rode a gentle mare provided by the rancher, with her salvaged possessions and new supplies packed securely. "Take care of our Quinn," Martha whispered as they said their goodbyes, a knowing gleam in her eye that made Cordelia blush. The first day's travel was pleasant, with clear skies and moderate temperatures. Quinn proved an engaging companion, sharing stories of the territory and pointing out interesting landmarks along the way. He was knowledgeable about both the natural world and local history, revealing an education that seemed at odds with his chosen profession. "How does a man with your learning end up a ranch foreman?" Cordelia asked as they stopped to rest the horses beside a small stream. Quinn's expression grew distant. "I studied law, once upon a time, in St. Louis." He absently stroked his horse's neck. "War came. Things changed. You fought." Missouri was a bloody place during those years, brother against brother in truth, not just rhetoric. He shook his head slightly. "Afterward, I practiced law for a while, but some ghosts don't rest easy. Came west thinking I'd outrun them." "Did you?" His eyes met hers. "Until recently, I thought they were always just a step behind." "Now." He didn't finish the thought, but something in his gaze made Cordelia's heart quicken. They reached the way station by dusk, a simple adobe structure operated by an elderly couple who welcomed them warmly. Senor and Senora Mendoza provided a hot meal of beans, tortillas, and chili stew, along with separate sleeping quarters that preserved propriety while offering comfort. "How long have you been married?" Cordelia asked the couple as they sat around the table after dinner. 52 years, Senora Mendoza answered, her wrinkled hand resting atop her husband's. "We met when I was just 16, and he was working for my father's freighting business." "What's your secret?" Quinn asked, a rare smile softening his features. "Forgiveness," Senor Mendoza replied without hesitation, "and remembering that each storm makes the rainbow after more beautiful." Cordelia felt Quinn's eyes on her as the old man spoke, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of how their own meeting had occurred amidst nature's fury. That night, lying on her narrow cot, Cordelia found sleep elusive. Her thoughts kept returning to Quinn, his kindness, his quiet strength, the shadows that occasionally darkened his gaze. In just a few days, they would reach Santa Fe, and their paths would diverge. The thought brought an unexpected ache to her chest. Morning dawned clear, but with clouds building on the western horizon. Quinn studied the sky with a slight frown as they prepared to depart. "More rain coming," he observed. "Might slow us down." Senora Mendoza pressed a small package of food into Cordelia's hands as they said goodbye. "For the journey," she said, then added in a lower voice, "He watches you the way my Antonio used to watch me. Some things, they do not change across the years." Cordelia felt heat rise to her cheeks, but couldn't deny the flutter of pleasure the woman's words evoked. They rode steadily through the morning, the terrain gradually changing as they moved into more mountainous country. Pinyon pines and juniper replaced the open grasslands, and the air grew cooler with the elevation. By midday, the clouds had thickened, though the rain held off. They stopped in a sheltered grove to rest the horses and eat some of Senora Mendoza's provisions, thick slices of cornbread and dried fruit. "Tell me about your life before Philadelphia," Quinn requested as they sat on a fallen log. "You mentioned your father, but what of your mother?" "She died when I was 8. Influenza." Cordelia's fingers traced patterns on the rough bark beside her. "Father never remarried, though many tried to catch his eye. He was a professor of classical literature at the university." "Explains your horse's name," Quinn remarked with a small smile. "Persis." Cordelia looked up, surprised. "You know your Greek mythology." "Your father wasn't the only one with an appreciation for the classics." There was a teasing light in his eyes. "Though I always preferred Odysseus myself, the wanderer finding his way home." "Have you found yours?" "Home, I mean." Quinn's expression grew thoughtful. "The Flying W is the closest I've come. Walter and Martha, they're good people. But..." He hesitated. But, she prompted gently, home isn't always a place. His eyes met hers, and the intensity in them made her breath catch. Sometimes it's a feeling you get when you're exactly where you're meant to be. Before Cordelia could respond, a distant rumble of thunder broke the moment. Quinn glanced at the darkening sky. We should get moving if we want to reach the trading post before the worst hits. They mounted quickly and continued their journey, now riding at a brisker pace. The wind picked up, bringing with it the scent of rain and the promise of another storm. Cordelia couldn't help but think of the last tempest and how it had brought Quinn into her life. The first drops began to fall as a cluster of buildings came into view in the valley below the trading post Quinn had mentioned. Unlike the way station, this was a more substantial settlement, with a main building, several outbuildings, and corrals for livestock. They reached it just as the rain intensified, dismounting quickly under the covered porch of the main building. A barrel-chested man with an impressive mustache greeted them at the door. Quinn Blackwood. Walter sent word you might be passing through. His eyes moved to Cordelia, and he doffed his hat. Madam, welcome to Cameron's post.
I'm Robert Cameron.
Cordelia Tucker. Thank you for your hospitality. Inside, the trading post was a fascinating blend of cultures. Navajo blankets hung alongside Missouri saddles. Spanish pottery shared shelf space with cast iron cookware from the east. A pot-bellied stove in the center provided warmth, and several rough-hewn tables offered seating. Got a private room for the lady, Cameron informed them. And you can bunk with the other travelers in the common room, Quinn. After settling in and seeing to the horses, they joined Cameron and several other guests for a hearty dinner. Among them were a cattle buyer from Kansas City, a Franciscan missionary traveling between parishes, and a young couple heading west to California. Conversation flowed easily, with tales of trail conditions, news from back east, and speculation about the territory's bid for statehood. Cordelia found herself enjoying the diverse perspectives and the casual camaraderie that seemed to form naturally among travelers. Throughout the evening, she was acutely aware of Quinn beside her, the warmth of his arm occasionally brushing hers, the rumble of his laugh at the cattle buyer's jokes, the quiet authority in his voice when he spoke of conditions further south. Later, as the others drifted off to their sleeping quarters and Cameron busied himself with accounts, Cordelia and Quinn found themselves alone by the stove. Outside, the storm continued, rain lashing against the windows in sheets. Reminds me of when we met, Cordelia said softly, watching the flames dance behind the stove's iron grating. Seems longer ago than just a few days, Quinn replied, his voice equally low. Like I've known you much longer. I feel the same way. She turned to face him. Quinn, I wanted to thank you. Not just for rescuing me from the storm, but for everything since. In the firelight, his features seemed softer, the usual guardedness in his eyes replaced by something warmer. No thanks needed. Nevertheless, you have my gratitude. She hesitated, then added, and my admiration. Not many men would have done what you did. You don't know many of the right men, then. His gaze held hers. Though I'm starting to think that storm might have done me the greater favor. Cordelia's heart quickened at his words. How so? Quinn seemed about to answer when Cameron reappeared from the back room, breaking the moment. Weather report from a rider just come in, the post owner announced. Arroyo north of here is flooding. Trail to Santa Fe might be impassable tomorrow. Quinn frowned. For how long? Day or two, depending on how much more rain we get tonight. Cameron shrugged apologetically. You're welcome to stay as long as needed. I know Walter would have my hide if I let anything happen to his foreman or the lady under his protection. After Cameron retired, Quinn turned back to Cordelia. I'm sorry for the delay. It's not your fault, and I'm not in any great hurry. She offered a small smile. Strange as it may sound, these past days have been the most interesting of my life. Something shifted in Quinn's expression, a softening, A decision made. Cordelia, he said, using her given name for the first time. There's something I should tell you. About why I was riding in that storm the day we met. Yes. I wasn't heading back from the South Range like I said. I was riding away from the Flying W. For good. Cordelia's breath caught. Why? Because 5 years ago, I killed a man. The words fell between them like stones. It was during a bank robbery in Texas. I was there by chance, drew faster than the robber. Everyone called it justified, but his brother didn't see it that way. He swore vengeance. Is that how you were shot? The wound Martha mentioned. Quinn nodded. He tracked me to Missouri, then to Colorado. I thought I'd lost him by coming to the territory, but a week ago, Walter got word he'd been asking about me in Albuquerque. So, you were leaving to protect the ranch, Cordelia realized. To keep Walter and the others safe. That was my plan. Until the storm hit, and I saw a broken wagon, and a woman who needed help. His eyes held hers steadily. I couldn't ride past. And then, after spending time with you. What? I started thinking maybe running wasn't the answer. Maybe it was time to face what was coming. He took a deep breath. The delay, because of the flooded arroyo, it might be a blessing in disguise. Gives me time to figure out what to do next. Cordelia reached out impulsively, covering his hand with hers. Whatever you decide, I'm glad the storm brought you to me. Quinn's fingers intertwined with hers, the simple touch conveying more than words could express. They sat in companionable silence, watching the fire and listening to the rain, each lost in thoughts of what might lie ahead. Morning revealed a transformed landscape. The trading post stood like an island in a sea of mud, with the nearby arroyo swollen well beyond its banks. Cameron's assessment had been correct. Travel would be impossible for at least a day, possibly 2. Cordelia found she didn't mind the delay. The trading post offered new sights and interesting company, and more importantly, additional time with Quinn. They spent the day helping around the post, Quinn assisting with repairs to a roof damaged by the storm, Cordelia organizing goods in the store alongside Cameron's wife, a cheerful woman named Rebecca. Known Quinn long? Rebecca asked, as they arranged bolts of calico on a shelf. Just since the storm last week, Cordelia admitted. He rescued me when my wagon broke down. Rebecca smiled knowingly. Seems like more than a chance meeting, the way you two look at each other. Cordelia felt heat rise to her cheeks, but couldn't deny the observation. He's an unusual man. That he is. Walter thinks the world of him, says he's the son he never had. Rebecca handed her another bolt of fabric. Quinn doesn't talk much about his past, but it's clear he's carried some heavy burdens. Nice to see him lightening up around you. The day passed pleasantly, with a small community of travelers making the best of their forced delay. In the evening, Cameron's teenage son produced a fiddle, and impromptu dancing broke out in the main room, tables pushed aside to create space. Quinn surprised Cordelia by asking her to dance, his hand extended with formal courtesy that belied their rustic surroundings. She accepted, allowing him to lead her into a lively reel alongside the other travelers. You dance well for a cowboy, she teased as they circled each other. Went to my share of cotillions before the war, he replied with a small smile. Some things you don't forget. As the music slowed to a waltz, Quinn's hand settled to her waist, maintaining a respectable distance while still drawing her closer than the livelier dance had required. Cordelia was acutely aware of his touch, of the steady rhythm of his breathing, of the way his eyes never left her face. If circumstances were different, he said quietly, if we'd met in St. Louis or Philadelphia, at a proper dance with proper introductions. Yes, she prompted when he paused. I'd have still thought you the most remarkable woman in the room. The simple sincerity of his words touched her deeply. And I'd have still preferred your company to all others. They continued dancing, moving together as if they'd done so countless times before. Around them, the other couples blurred into insignificance, the music becoming merely a backdrop to the unspoken connection growing between them. Later, as the gathering began to disperse for the night, Quinn walked Cordelia to the door of her room. "One more day, Cameron thinks," he said. "Then we can continue to Santa Fe." "And then?" she asked, the question encompassing far more than their journey. Quinn's expression grew serious. "I need to resolve the situation with the man hunting me. I won't bring that danger to your aunt's doorstep." "What will you do?" "Send word to the territorial marshal. Face this properly, through the law I once served." His hand moved as if to touch her face, then dropped back to his side. "After that?" "Well, I'm hoping you might allow me to call on you in Santa Fe." Cordelia's heart lightened at his words. "I'd like that very much. Good night, Cordelia." He hesitated, then bent slightly, pressing a gentle kiss to her cheek. "Sleep well." She watched him walk away, her hand rising to touch the spot where his lips had been, a smile spreading across her face despite the worries his revelation had brought. The next day dawned clear, with sunshine that began the process of drying the sodden landscape. Cameron predicted they would be able to travel by the following morning, and preparations began for the various guests to continue their journeys. Cordelia was helping Rebecca prepare lunch when a rider arrived at the trading post, a dusty, hard-faced man who dismounted with stiff movements that suggested long hours in the saddle. From her position by the window, Cordelia saw Quinn emerge from the barn, freeze momentarily upon seeing the newcomer, then slowly approach. The two men stood facing each other, tension evident even from a distance. "Trouble," Rebecca muttered beside her. "That's Jed Harmon. Bad reputation." Cordelia's hand tightened on the wooden spoon she was holding. "The brother of the man Quinn killed?" Rebecca's startled glance confirmed her guess. "How did you? Quinn told me." Cordelia set down the spoon and moved toward the door. "I need to. Best stay inside," Rebecca cautioned, catching her arm. "Men like Harmon don't care who gets hurt." Through the window, they watched as Quinn and Harmon exchanged words, their stances rigid. Other men from the trading post began to gather at a cautious distance, including Cameron with a shotgun held ready but not raised. The confrontation lasted several minutes before Harmon abruptly turned, remounted his horse, and rode a short distance away. He stopped at the edge of the trading post grounds, clearly not departing but removing himself from immediate conflict. Quinn spoke briefly with Cameron before heading toward the main building. When he entered, his face was grim but composed. "Cordelia," he said upon seeing her, "we need to talk." In the privacy of a small storeroom, Quinn explained the situation. "Harmon's been tracking me for months. Says he won't leave until one of us is dead. But surely the law, he's careful to stay just on the right side of it. Makes no direct threats where others can hear, just follows and waits." Quinn ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Cameron's sending a rider to fetch the marshal, but he's 3 days out at least. What will you do until then?" "Keep my distance, try to avoid a confrontation. Harmon's hoping I'll draw first so he can claim self-defense." His eyes met hers, filled with regret. "I'm sorry you've been pulled into this." Cordelia stepped closer, placing her hand on his arm. "Don't be." "I'm not." Quinn covered her hand with his own. "You should still leave for Santa Fe tomorrow. Cameron can provide an escort." "I'm not leaving you," she said firmly. "Not when you stayed with me through the storm." For a moment, Quinn looked as though he might argue, but instead, he simply nodded, a complicated mix of emotions crossing his face. "Then we wait for the marshal. Together." The remainder of the day passed in tense vigilance. Harmon made camp within sight of the trading post, but made no move to approach. Quinn kept busy with chores around the post, always maintaining awareness of the watcher's position. That evening, as the sun set behind the western mountains, Cordelia found Quinn on the back porch, his gaze fixed on Harmon's distant campfire. "You should get some rest," he told her without turning. Tomorrow might be eventful. So should you. She moved to stand beside him. You can't keep watch all night. I've managed with less sleep before. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Though I appreciate the concern. They stood in silence for a moment, the cool night air carrying the scent of sage and pinyon. I've been thinking, Cordelia said finally, about what you said regarding home being a feeling rather than a place. Quinn turned to look at her. And I think I understand what you meant. She met his gaze steadily. When we're together, despite all that's happened, the storm, the broken wagon, even this current danger, I feel
Right.
as though I'm exactly where I should be. The admission hung between them, vulnerable and true. Quinn's expression softened, the worry lines around his eyes easing. Cordelia, he began, his voice low and intense. If we get through this, a gunshot shattered the night, the bullet splintering the wood of the porch railing inches from where they stood. Quinn reacted instantly, pulling Cordelia down and shielding her with his body as he drew his revolver. Inside, he ordered. Now. They scrambled through the door as another shot rang out. Inside, the trading post had erupted into activity, men grabbing weapons, women and children being hurried to the back rooms. He's making his move, Cameron growled, checking a shotgun. Probably figure he'd provoke you into a fight by threatening the lady. Quinn's jaw tightened. He's right about that. Quinn, no. Cordelia gripped his arm. That's what he wants. I won't hide while he threatens innocent people. Quinn's eyes met hers, filled with determination and something deeper. Especially not you. Cameron interrupted their exchange. Back doors secure. He's still out front, using the water trough for cover. Got 3 men with rifles watching, but it's too dark for a clean shot. Quinn considered this information. If I can draw his fire, give your men a chance to pin him down. Absolutely not, Cordelia interrupted, her voice firm despite her fear. There must be another way. Before anyone could respond, the front door burst open, and 2 travelers rushed in, supporting a third between them, the young man bound for California, now clutching his bloodied arm. Harmon shot him, one explained breathlessly. We were checking the horses when he opened fire. As Cameron's wife rushed to tend the wounded man, Quinn's expression hardened. This ends now. Quinn, Cordelia began. I need you safe, he cut her off gently. Please stay inside. Without waiting for a response, he moved to the door, exchanging quick words with Cameron and the armed men positioned at windows. Cordelia watched, heart pounding, as strategic positions were assigned and a plan quickly formed. Unable to remain idle, she found Rebecca in the back room, helping to tend the wounded traveler. Bandages, the older woman instructed, and Cordelia set to work tearing strips from a clean sheet, her mind racing with fear for Quinn even as her hands worked steadily. Outside, she could hear men's voices calling to one another, positioning themselves around the trading post. Then Quinn's voice, clear and carrying. Harmon, this has gone far enough. You've shot an innocent man. A harsh laugh answered him. Not so innocent if he's sheltering you, Blackwood. The marshal's been sent for. End this now, before more people get hurt. Only one who's gonna get hurt is you. Harmon shouted back. Unless you're too yellow to face me man to man. The exchange continued, with Quinn attempting to reason while Harmon grew increasingly belligerent. Cordelia finished preparing bandages and moved cautiously toward the front room, needing to know what was happening. Through a window, she could see Quinn standing on the porch, partially protected by a support post, his revolver held ready, but not aimed. Harmon remained behind the water trough, only his hat and the barrel of his rifle visible. Last chance, Harmon, Quinn called. Throw down your weapon. You killed my brother. Your brother was robbing a bank. He shot a teller before I drew on him. Quinn's voice remained steady. I'm sorry for your loss, but more bloodshed won't bring him back. For a moment, silence fell. Then Harmon surged up from behind the trough, rifle raised. Die, you son of a— Multiple shots rang out simultaneously. Quinn's revolver, rifles from the trading post windows, and Harmon's weapon. Cordelia gasped as Quinn staggered backward, catching himself against the porch railing. Quinn! She rushed forward despite Rebecca's attempt to hold her back. Outside, Harmon lay motionless by the water trough, felled by several shots. Men approached cautiously, weapons still trained on his still form. Cordelia reached Quinn as he sank onto a porch bench, his left hand pressed to his right shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. I'm all right, he assured her, though his face was pale. Bullet just grazed me. Relief flooded through her, followed quickly by anger. You could have been killed. A faint smile touched his lips. Your concern is touching. This isn't funny, Quinn Blackwood. Tears threatened, but she blinked them back, focusing instead on examining his wound. We need to get you inside. With Cameron's help, they moved Quinn to a bedroom, where Rebecca took charge of cleaning and bandaging the injury. The bullet had indeed only grazed him, tearing a furrow across his upper arm that, while painful and bloody, wasn't serious. Lucky, Rebecca pronounced as she finished securing the bandage. An inch to the left and we'd be digging lead out of you. Once they were alone, Cordelia sat beside Quinn on the edge of the bed, her emotions a tumultuous mix of relief, lingering fear, and something deeper she wasn't yet ready to name. You frightened me, she said softly. Standing out there like a target. It needed to end. Quinn reached for her hand with his uninjured arm. I couldn't let him threaten you, or anyone else here. Is it truly over now? Quinn nodded slowly. Harmon was the last ghost from my past. The only one who ever came hunting. His fingers tightened around hers. For the first time in years, I can look forward instead of constantly watching behind me. And what do you see when you look forward? Cordelia asked, her heart beating rapidly. Quinn's eyes met hers, clear and unguarded. I see possibilities I never thought I'd have again. A future that seems worth building. He paused, then added softly, if you're willing to be part of it. The simple sincerity of his words touched something deep within her. I think I'd like that very much. They remained that way for a long moment, hands clasped, the connection between them strengthening with each passing second. Outside, the commotion had settled as Cameron and the others dealt with the aftermath of the confrontation. We should still leave for Santa Fe tomorrow, Quinn said eventually. Your aunt will be expecting you. Are you well enough to travel? I've ridden with worse. At her skeptical look, he added, though perhaps we'll take it slower than planned. The next morning dawned clear and bright, with no sign of the recent storms except for the gradually drying landscape. Harmon's body had been properly attended to, awaiting the marshal's arrival, and the young traveler he'd wounded was recovering well. Quinn's injury, while painful, didn't prevent him from riding, though Cameron insisted on sending one of his men along as additional escort. They departed after breakfast, with the trading post residents gathering to see them off. Thank you for everything, Cordelia told Rebecca as they said their goodbyes. Take care of him, the older woman replied with a knowing smile. He's a good man who's had too little happiness. I intend to. The journey to Santa Fe took 2 days rather than one, with Quinn setting a deliberately moderate pace. They traveled through increasingly mountainous terrain, the landscape a breathtaking mix of rugged peaks, pine forests, and high desert plateaus. During the journey, they spoke of many things, their pasts, their hopes, the unexpected path that had brought them together. With each conversation, each shared smile, each companionable silence, the bond between them deepened. They camped the night under the stars, with Cameron's man discreetly setting his bedroll at a distance that provided both protection and privacy. Beside the campfire, Quinn and Cordelia sat close together, watching the flames dance. Tell me about Santa Fe, Quinn requested. what you know of it from your aunt's letters. She describes it as a place where worlds meet American, Spanish, Indian. Adobe buildings around a central plaza, a cathedral with bells that ring across the valley. Cordelia smiled, remembering. She says the sunsets paint the mountains purple and gold, and the air smells of pinyon smoke and chiles. Sounds like she loves it. She does. Her last letter said she can't imagine living anywhere else now. Cordelia glanced at Quinn. Have you been there before? Once, briefly. Delivering horses for Walter. He poked at the fire with a stick. It's beautiful country. Different from the plains around the Flying W, but with its own kind of magic. Will you return to the ranch after? She let the question trail off, uncertain how to frame it. Quinn's eyes met hers across the firelight. That depends. On what? On whether I have reason to stay in Santa Fe. The words were simple, but laden with meaning. Cordelia's heart quickened. And if you did have reason? Then I need to speak with Walter about my position. A small smile touched his lips. He's been after me to take on more of the business side anyway, buying, selling, negotiating contracts. Could do most of that from Santa Fe, with regular visits to the ranch. The casual way he outlined a future that included her both thrilled and humbled Cordelia. You've given this some thought. Since the moment I found you in that storm. Quinn's voice lowered. I know it's fast, perhaps too fast by proper standards. But out here, life doesn't always allow for lengthy courtships and formal introductions. No, she agreed softly. It doesn't. They arrived in Santa Fe the following afternoon. The ancient city spread before them as they crested the final hill, adobe buildings in warm earth tones, the spire of the cathedral rising above them, mountains framing the scene in purple majesty. It's just as she described, Cordelia breathed, taking in the view. Quinn smiled at her wonder. Let's find your aunt. Clara Montoya's millinery shop occupied a prime position just off the plaza, its window displaying elegant hats that combined Eastern fashion with Southwestern influences. As they dismounted outside, Cordelia felt a sudden nervousness, not only at reuniting with her long unseen aunt but at introducing Quinn and explaining all that had transpired. A bell tinkled as they entered the shop. A slender woman with silver-streaked dark hair looked up from where she was arranging ribbons, her features lighting with recognition. Cordelia? Dios mío, is it really you? She hurried forward, embracing her niece warmly before holding her at arm's length for inspection. Look at you, the journey agrees with you. But you're late. I was beginning to worry. There were complications, Aunt Clara. Cordelia gestured to Quinn, who stood respectfully near the door. This is Quinn Blackwood. He saved me when my wagon broke down in a storm. Clara's shrewd eyes assessed Quinn quickly, taking in his bandaged arm, trail-worn appearance, and the way he looked at her niece. A knowing smile curved her lips. Señor Blackwood, it seems I owe you a great debt. She extended her hand. Welcome to Santa Fe and to my home. The next weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity as Cordelia settled into life in Santa Fe. Clara's home, a comfortable adobe house behind the shop, provided ample space for both women. Quinn took a room at a nearby boarding house, calling on Cordelia daily as propriety allowed. He sent word to Walter explaining the situation and received an enthusiastic response, along with an official appointment as the Flying W's business representative in Santa Fe. The position required occasional travels to the ranch and to other towns where they did business, but allowed him to base himself primarily in the city. Clara observed their growing relationship with approving eyes, telling Cordelia privately, "He looks at you the way my Antonio looked at me, like you are the sun rising after the longest night." Spring blossomed into summer, and with it, Quinn and Cordelia's courtship flourished. They explored Santa Fe together, the ancient plaza with its diverse merchants, the cathedral with its soaring ceilings, the surrounding hills with their panoramic views. Quinn introduced her to people he knew from his business dealings, while Clara's wide social circle welcomed them both into the unique blend of cultures that define the city. On a warm evening in July, Quinn took Cordelia riding into the foothills east of town. They stopped at a viewpoint overlooking the city, dismounting to watch the sunset transform the landscape into a canvas of gold and crimson. "I never imagined finding this," Quinn said as they stood together, his arm around her waist. "When I rode out in that storm, I thought I was leaving everything behind." Cordelia leaned into him. "And instead, I found everything I never knew I was looking for." He turned to face her fully. "Cordelia Tucker, I love you. I think I've loved you since I found you standing beside that broken wagon, drenched and defiant." Joy bloomed in her chest, warm and radiant. "I love you too, Quinn." He took her hands in his. "I know it's only been a few months, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." From his pocket, he withdrew a small ring, a simple gold band set with a turquoise stone in the local style. "Will you marry me?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation, her eyes shining. "With all my heart, yes." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Quinn drew her close, his lips finding hers in a kiss that spoke of promises kept and a future full of possibility. When they finally parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "That day in the storm," he whispered, "when I first saw you, something happened I can't explain. It was like everything I'd been running from and toward suddenly made sense." Cordelia smiled, her hand rising to touch his face. "What did it mean?" Quinn's eyes, warm with love, held hers as he whispered, "You're the only thing I've ever wanted. I just didn't know it until then." They were married in the cathedral a month later, with Clara and Walter, who had traveled from the ranch for the occasion, standing as witnesses. The celebration afterward blended traditions: Spanish music, American dances, food that represented both their backgrounds and the territory they now called home. As summer turned to autumn, Quinn and Cordelia established their own household, a small but comfortable adobe home on the outskirts of Santa Fe, with views of both the mountains and the city. Quinn's business for the Flying W prospered, while Cordelia discovered a talent for designing the hats in her aunt's shop, creating styles that became sought after by ladies throughout the territory. On the first anniversary of the storm that had brought them together, they rode out to the foothills again, to the spot where Quinn had proposed. The landscape spread before them in autumn glory. The cottonwoods along the distant Rio Grande turned to gold, the mountains dusted with the first snow of the season. "Any regrets?" Quinn asked as they stood together, his arm around her waist, her head resting on his shoulder. "Not one," Cordelia answered truthfully. "Though I sometimes wonder what would have happened if my wagon hadn't broken down that day. I believe we would have found each other somehow." Quinn pressed a kiss to her temple. "Some things are meant to be, storm or no storm." She smiled, turning in his embrace to face him. "I have news." His eyebrows raised in question. "Come spring, our family will grow by one." Her hand moved to her still flat stomach. "Doctor confirmed it yesterday." Joy spread across Quinn's face, followed by tenderness as he gently placed his hand over hers.
A child.
"Our child. Are you happy?" "Beyond words." He drew her close, his kiss conveying what language could not. As they rode home, in the gathering dusk, Cordelia reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from the loss and uncertainty in Philadelphia to this life rich with love and purpose. The storm that had seemed a disaster had been the beginning of everything good. Their daughter, Clara Rose Blackwood, was born the following May, a healthy, strong-lunged child with her father's hazel eyes and her mother's chestnut hair. Quinn proved himself an adoring father, as tender with his infant daughter as he was capable in business and protective of his family. Life in Santa Fe continued to evolve as the territory grew. The railroad arrived, bringing increased commerce and new settlers. Quinn's business expanded to include investments in the mercantile trade, while Cordelia's hat designs gained recognition beyond the territory. 2 years after Clara Rose's birth, they welcomed a son, William Walter Blackwood, named for both Quinn's mentor and Cordelia's father. Their family complete, they built a larger home that combined the adobe style of the region with elements of Eastern comfort, a home where both their backgrounds were honored and their future secured. On summer evenings, they would often sit on their portal-to-covered porch traditional to Santa Fe homes, watching their children play in the garden as the sunset painted the mountains in colors no artist could capture. "Do you ever miss it?" Cordelia asked one such evening, her hand resting comfortably in Quinn's. "The life of a cowboy, I mean. The open range, the freedom of it." Quinn considered the question, his gaze moving from their children to the mountains beyond, then back to her face. "No," he answered simply. "I found something better than freedom. I found belonging." His words echoed in her heart, affirming what she'd come to understand through their years together, that sometimes the greatest adventures come not from wandering, but from the courage to stand still, to build, to love. And as twilight deepened into night, stars appearing in the vast New Mexico sky, Quinn and Cordelia Blackwood held each other close, grateful for the storm that had once seemed a disaster, but had instead been the beginning of everything good, the wind that had blown them not apart but together into the shelter of each other's hearts.